It's been 1 year since the war came back in our region. When Russia invaded Ukraine, half of the world said, "We knew it's coming." The other half was deeply surprised. Was it a surprise? And were we ready for everything that followed? Did Europe provide enough help? What more can we do? And can we do anything to stop this? Hello, I'm Marina Stoimenova, and together with my colleagues from Ukraine, Romania, Georgia, Albania, Serbia, and France, are searching for the answers. In Ukraine, in Kyiv today, we have Anastasia Dimitrova. Sasha Vakulina is in Lyon, Nuka Kekilia in Tbilisi, Franko Egro in Tirana, Andra Diaconescu in Bucharest, and Bojan Brkic in Belgrade. Hello everybody, and thanks for joining us today.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Террор вам никто никогда не простит, никто в мире вам этого не простит, Украина никогда не простит.
Мама, что? Заходите.
We have many things to talk about and many topics concerning the war, but first let's go to Kyiv, where is Anastasia Dimitrova. Nastya, what is the situation 1 year after the first bombs hit?
Hello from Kyiv. Life in Ukrainian capital has changed dramatically for the past 12 months. In the early days, weeks and months of the conflict, millions of Ukrainians fled the country in order to escape it. Today, many of Kyiv's residents are back to their homes. They are used to air raid alerts. Everybody knows what to do when they hear the sirens. Extra security measures were taken here in Kyiv days before the anniversary. Schools in the capital were closed and children went to distance learning. Authorities urged residents to be vigilant because of expected shelling. Some of the capital's citizens decided to leave it temporarily before the anniversary just to be in a safer place. The week of the anniversary was marked by a few key visits here in Kyiv. The most important one, probably, of them was the visit of the United States President, Joe Biden, who arrived in the Ukrainian capital on Monday. He met President Volodymyr Zelensky and reaffirmed that the West will continue to support Ukraine until the end. At the same time, Russia continues its offensive in Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts. Experts say that the offensive that was expected in the spring has already started, but it will not have the scale we saw a year ago. The blow on the Ukraine's economy was severe in the past year. This affected every citizen of the country. The latest forecast from the International Monetary Fund is that the country's economy will gradually start to recover this year, but Ukraine will need the support from its allies. At the same time, we see that the military support is expanding. Many more countries are sending what the Ukrainian army needs to protect the country.
Thank you, Anastasia. We're coming back to you a little bit later, but one of the first journalists in the world in the first day of the war in Ukraine was Sasha Vakulina from Euronews. Sasha, was this war expected, or the world underestimated the signs? What do you think?
I arrived to Kyiv on the 13th of February, taking one of the last flights from Paris to Kyiv by Air France. The West had been issuing warning after warning that the war was highly probable and that Russia was going to invade Ukraine. The atmosphere in Ukrainian capital was very different. It was defiant and even somehow dismissive. People were tired of hearing the Western warnings and were just living their lives with daily routine unbothered, except for some conversations in the evening with families and friends, which all started with the same question: do you think it is going to happen? There were even indicated dates, and when Russia did not invade on the 16th of February and then on the 22nd, the mood somehow lightened up, but not for long. On the evening of the 23rd of February, the tension was growing among the population. By midnight, it was almost palpable. I received the information from my sources late in the evening of the 23rd of February with the warning the invasion was very probable and it was coming. But despite this tension, most of the Ukrainians had the same reaction, some sort of a disbelief. The disbelief that something like that can be possible in 2022, that the war of aggression is possible in the 21st century, that one country can invade a neighboring independent country, can throw tanks and planes and can bomb cities and launch missiles at the country of 45 million people, targeting the civilians. Now, so did the world underestimate the signs? I don't think so. I think the world just could not comprehend it, could not believe in Russia unleashing war, because the world, us, we simply believed in humanity.
So on the 24th of February last year, when the war began, what did you hear? What did you see? What were the first picture that you saw and probably, I'm sure you will never forget until the rest of your life?
No one ever will. Ukrainians were somehow used to living in the war since 2014, but the full-scale invasion was very different. Most of us never seen missiles hitting residential buildings from our windows. Most of us do not know the sound of the air raid sirens. I started the news coverage with the first explosions in Kyiv, then went to the metro station, the closest bomb shelter for many civilians. The stations were filling up really quickly. People came with their families, with their children, with their pets. In the morning of the 24th of February, they did not know yet that many of them would stay at those metro stations for weeks. I then went around central Kyiv, watching how people react, what do they do, how they behave. In January, in Lyon, at the Euronews headquarters, we had a few editorial meetings about the possible invasion, what could happen in Ukraine, and possible scenarios. As a Ukrainian myself, I had a different perspective on that. When we discussed what would ordinary people do should Russia invade, Western think tanks predicted they would surrender and flee Ukraine. Meeting after meeting, I said Ukrainians would not surrender. Ukrainians would fight even if they wouldn't stand a chance bare hands. And this was my take as a Ukrainian who understands the mentality of the people, which helped me as a journalist. And that's what I saw in central Kyiv in the morning of the 24th of February. Men and women arriving as volunteers to the military conscription offices. And this was the decisive factor that cannot be evaluated or estimated.
Thank you, Sasha. We're coming back to you in a couple of minutes, but first let's talk about the impact of the war. The whole region faced a lot of changes, problems and questions in the following days and months. One of them was the huge refugee wave from Ukraine and also the Russians that decided to leave the country. Georgia was one of the countries, and Romania, of course, that experienced this most strongly. Nuka Kekelia from Tbilisi is with us. Nuka, how was Georgia affected from this huge wave?
Yes, Georgia was one of the shelters for tens of thousands of Ukrainians who arrived in the country after the war started. And according to the official data, about 150,000 Ukrainians arrived in Georgia since then. And there are several non-governmental organizations in Georgia, also civil organizations, and a number of people organizing permanently a number of actions, humanitarian or cultural, for fundraising to assist those who were affected from the war. But we cannot say that the attitudes of Georgian population were so welcoming to those Russians who arrived in Georgia since the war began. And we can say that it was a huge influx, as 1.5 million Russian citizens crossed the Russia-Georgia border after 24th of February 2022. So we can say that the impact of this influx was really great. And first of all, there were security issues that arose in the Georgian society. As you know, that Georgia and Russia has some kind of quite hostile relations for so many years. And Russia and Georgia do not have any diplomatic relations in the war of 2008. So it was natural that Georgian population had some fears that it was a threat to Georgia's national security, that so many Russians were arriving in Georgia, although despite the fact that many Russians arriving here were saying that they escaped from Putin's regime and they didn't want to go to fight in Ukraine. Another effect, I would say, was huge economic impact. The prices rise in so many directions, and especially in food products and on real estate. So it's impossible in Tbilisi now, quite impossible to hire a flat or buy an apartment. So, and finally, to sum up, I would say that the recent surveys of public opinion in Georgia show that a vast majority of Georgian population consider Russians as a threat to Georgia's national security, and they demand that the government imposed a visa regime to Russia.
Okay, let's see more in the video.
Many in Georgia know this anthem by heart, and it is very often sung in Tbilisi and other cities throughout the country, mostly at the rallies supporting Ukraine. About 160,000 citizens of Ukraine have arrived in Georgia during 2022, although the majority of them have left the country.
We had to leave the country under the pressure. War and occupation are really frightening situations. It appears as though they are stealing your life. We incredibly appreciate Georgia's hospitality and its people's generous support.
Differently from Ukrainians, Russian citizens have long-term plans in Georgia. About 1,500,000 Russian citizens arrived in the country since 24 February 2022. Yet it is unknown how many of them stayed here. And their presence is evident everywhere in the streets, cafes, even in the bookshops.
We are here because of the war Russia started. We do not want to live in a country which is attacking others and carrying out fascist deeds.
Not many in Georgia seem happy with the huge influx of the Russian citizens. The recent surveys show that about 70% of Georgian population thinks that the arrival of Russian citizens will negatively impact the country and support imposing a visa regime on their northern neighbor. Anne Gudushauri, Euronews Georgia.
Talking about refugees, same goes for Romania. Along with Poland, the two countries probably face the biggest refugee wave. How many refugees since the war began? What are the measures of the government? Andra Diaconescu, editor-in-chief of Euronews Romania, will give us details. Andra.
Hi, Marina. Hello, everybody. Almost 4 million Ukrainians have entered Romania since the war started. And we witnessed heartbreaking stories because we saw how families were just breaking apart at the border, and the men just remained in their country, in Ukraine, and women with children entered Romania. The first days were heartbreaking because we saw how they stayed in queues, in lines for hours, just hoping to save themselves, to save their children. Now, after 1 year, we can see successful stories, or we can see that most of them try to do something with their lives. They started businesses, they try to take the children to schools, so they are reconnecting with like a normal life. But of course, they always talk about what is going on back home, about their husbands, their fathers, or their brothers. What the government did for all these people, for this huge wave of people coming to Romania, was to try to put them in refugee camps. Also, the government helped with the support for the rent that they would pay if they stay in block of flats. And of course, they try to put their children to schools and find teachers who can talk in Ukrainian in order for the children to study and not to stay separated from the other children. This is the story in Romania here now.
Okay, let's change a bit the topic. The whole world, but mostly maybe our whole region, was deeply affected without any doubt. Economics suffered the most. How did it affect everyday life in Romania? Andra, this is a question for you again.
Well, for the past year, we keep talking about the food crisis. It's not an ongoing conversation here in Romania, but only it happens since the war started in Ukraine. And of course, all the prices went up and everybody is just asking what will happen next. In terms of numbers, I can tell you that the top in increased numbers and prices are energy, food, alcohol, and cigarettes. And Romania finished last year with an inflation of 16%. And the median salary just increased with 13%. So all people here in Romania are just finding ways to cope with this big prices boom. We did a package together and we are talking about how the prices for eggs increased. And we see here 35%. The energy increased in prices 4 times. The cereals doubled. The food products, 22% increase. So what happened here in Romania was that people just tried to change their consumption habits. And what they are doing, they are going to shops, they don't buy more than they know they will consume. And of course, they always look at the best price for their products. Some of the people and most affected are the people who are living out of pensions are saying that there are weeks when they eat eggs or they eat meat once a week.
Okay, let's see the details, Andra.
Romanians have had to budget more and more for their shopping baskets every month as a result of the continuous price increases. From an average price increase of 8.4% in the first month of last year, the annual inflation had reached 16.4% last December. Prices for food alone rose to 22%, according to the official statistics. But shoppers' calculations are different.
How much more do we spend on shopping now compared to this time last year? Well, at least with the inflation rate. What is the amount? I feel that is around 25%. I haven't done a count, but we spend almost double, at least 45–50%. About 30% more or less.
Last year, the most expensive price increase was for a kilo of sugar, 62%. Next on the list come the prices for butter, oil and potatoes. They are up to 45%. Nevertheless, earnings have not grown as much. Average wages rose by 13.6%, well below the inflation rate. It was a year when Romanians were forced to look for backup solutions. First and foremost, not to leave the supermarket with an empty shopping basket.
Well, first I have selected a supermarket which I find to be more convenient. I pay close attention to prices, to promotions, to bargains, to everything that you can buy for less money. Experts recommend shopping from the big department stores and not from those near our homes due to higher markups. Another trick to remember is to avoid going shopping when hungry or when accompanied by children, because the little ones will inevitably ask for more things than what had been added on the shopping list.
Foodstuffs are not the only products which met with higher costs. Energy tariffs alone have risen by 45% in 2022 and gas by 35%. Food and household utilities are incidentally the biggest consumer expenses of a household budget. That's almost half of the total. Calculated per household member, food costs an average of 445 lei a month, while bills amount to about 200 lei. With figures such as these, Romania ranks last within the European Union when it comes to the monthly income. Yet we are not the only one struggling with inflation.
The bad thing is that we have high inflation. The good thing is that we have high inflation in every country. So it is not a particular or country issue of Romania, and therefore it will impact, and it is impacting all the neighboring countries as well. Every European Union, Eurozone, but also other countries. No? I would say, a little bit optimistic on the future of how we are managing inflation.
The Romanian finance minister is also optimistic when it comes to the evolution of prices.
I could say, a certainty, but I would let the time to speak first. Perhaps the calculations lead me to the area of single-digit inflation at the end of 2023. Too optimistic? Yes. When you say that, you're assuming that no element of chance could possibly happen.
This is the scenario that the National Bank of Romania is considering.
We probably had a peak in November with a slight downtrend in the first quarter. From the second part of the year, we will have a significant decline in inflation, and that's very important.
For the end of this year, the experts forecast that inflation will range between 7 and 9%.
I remember Albania was working hard on advertising its tourism, trying to attract Russians before the war. How did it affect the economy of the country? Question for Franko Egro in Tirana.
Hi, Marina. Thank you very much for the question. It is true that the Albanian tour operators and the government of Albania, they were investing hard in bringing as many foreign tourists as possible. In terms of the Russians and the Ukrainians, they started to come to Albania, not in huge numbers, but they were coming in. During the last 6 years, according to the official figures, there were approximately 160,000 Russians and over 300,000 Ukrainians. The tour operators with whom I spoke said that the war in Ukraine obliged them basically to cancel all the arrivals from these two countries. They were worried about one element. Being aggressive means one thing, but the result is another one. And as far as the tourist situation in the country these days, the number of the tourists from these two countries that are at war with one another are not entering Albania, although the government of Albania have removed the visas for the citizens of these two countries. Another impact that the war is having in this specific industry that is extremely important for the economic situation in Albania is the fact that it is the number of the tourists that are coming from neighboring countries like Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia is diminishing. Hungary as well is diminishing as well. The tour operators with whom I spoke said that the trend that they started to work on and that was paying off is stopped. And this is a major concern for them. At the moment, we should underline one element that the Albanian tourist operators and the government is trying to invest a lot in this industry, trying to get as many tourists, as many foreign tourists as possible from neighboring countries. But another interesting fact is that tourists from Spain, England, and other Western European countries are coming to Albania to explore it as probably the last destination unknown to them.
Let's see more.
The war in Ukraine negatively affected the reveal of tourism in many countries, including Albania. Tourist operators do not accept bookings from Russia and Belarus this year either, as long as the conflict there is open. Although it's experienced a good season, Albania could have received more tourists last year if the war in Ukraine had not taken place. Over the summer, the Albanian government issued visas from countries near the war-struck zones, but the visitors from Russia and Belarus were few.
This increase would have been even greater if the war in Ukraine had not affected it. Uncertainty in the east of Europe and high inflation of up to 20% made the citizens of Eastern Europe to come to Albania. Operators do not expect an increase in tourists from conflict zones, and this year they are targeting people from the Middle East and distant Asia. There will be an increase as Albania is receiving more and more tourists from other areas from the Middle East and Asia.
Last year, 7.5 million foreign tourists came to Albania. This record is related to two factors.
The first factor is related to the post-pandemic period. People started to move more after the isolation, and the second factor is linked to air transport, where low-cost airlines doubled their flights from Tirana.
Compared to 2021, tourists increased by 33%, the majority of whom were from neighboring countries like Kosovo, North Macedonia and Italy, while local hotels also saw a steep rise in British and Spanish visitors.
Another country which is not part of the European Union is Serbia. What is the situation with the prices there? Bojan Brkic, editor-in-chief of Euronews Serbia, is with us. Bojan.
Well, the situation, Marina, in Serbia with the prices is pretty much similar to the one described to us by Andra in Romania. Right after the beginning of the war, all the prices started going up, and the citizens were particularly frustrated, especially because it directly hit them, that the prices of food in this agricultural country were going up, and the government had a lot of explaining to do, that this is due to disrupted chains of supply, because the fertilizers are more expensive and the energy is more expensive and the transport as well. And then the government tried to intervene, and they controlled prices of basic food products, which alleviated the situation for a while until it created occasional shortages of certain products. And now, at this particular moment, all these caps have been already lifted, except for the fuel, which is still regulated by the government. And where we stand now is that the average salary of a Serbian citizen can buy much less products. I'm not going to give you all the prices. They're very similar to the one we heard from Romania, but I will just tell you that, for instance, last year, Serbs could buy 430 liters of cooking oil for their salary. Now they can buy 360. That's 70 liters less. Also, we can buy 521 egg less than we could last year. So this is the main concern of the Serbian citizens. Now, the good thing in this whole situation is that utility bills and the energy bills for electricity did not go up, or at least not much. But what made the situation more complicated for those people who do not have housing of their own is that first of all, the housing prices went up, and second, if you rent an apartment, those 200,000 Russians who came to Serbia since the beginning of the mobilization in Russia have rented all the apartments, and those prices went up by sometimes as many as 300%. So if you don't have an apartment of your own, you're either in a problem with the rent or with the installments for your loans, because as we all know, the interest rates went up, and the sum of the installments for the loan bank loans went up by 20-30%, which really hit the population hard.
Bojan, I'm going to change the topic one more time. Most of our countries, we have relations and common history with Russia. Same goes for Serbia. The situation there is even more complicated. How did the war affect politics and relations between the two countries?
Well, Serbian relations with Russia are a bit different than for most other countries. To begin with, because unlike most of Eastern Europe, Serbia has never been ruled or dominated by Russia. So most historical events were sort of positive. But to skip ancient history, in modern times, right now, Russia was important for Serbia because it supported Serbia in its goal to prevent the independence of its breakaway province of Kosovo. Russia sits in the Security Council of the United Nations and vetoes all the decisions that lead to independence or possible membership of Kosovo in the UN. Based on that, good relations were built. The rhetoric between the two countries was very friendly for years and decades now. So now when the war started, Serbia found itself between the rock and the hard place because it is a candidate country for the European Union. European Union imposed sanctions on Russia. Serbia would not and suffers severe criticism from Brussels, from European capitals, and it happens all the time and very frequently. Now, what makes things even more complicated is this wound from 1999. One opinion poll here suggested that most Serbs are not so much in love with Russia as much as they want to spite NATO for bombing this country in 1999. So all in all, when Serbian government started hinting that sanctions against Russia might become inevitable because the conflict is growing and we see something that is reminiscent of the Cold War, and we will have to, geography will decide which side of the Iron Curtain we are going to be on. Some people find it very difficult to reconcile with that.
Yeah, and let's see the example you gave us. It's a good example.
A group of people, some of them masked and hooded, toppled the fence around the Serbian presidency, hurling insults, threats and finally eggs at the president's office before they were overpowered by the riot police. These demonstrators were just the most agile ones from a crowd of several thousand who gathered around the president's office to protest what they called the treason of Kosovo. Some demanded ouster of President Aleksandar Vučić, and not just any kind of ouster.
He who signs, he gets killed.
Among the crowd, members of the notorious group People's Patrols, who confront the migrants and boast ties with the Russian paramilitary organization Wagner. Their leader inviting Russia's help.
Should we allow Kosovo to become a UN member? So, who are we? 30 plus. What kind of generation are we to experience that and live? And they are afraid of riots. I swear to you, we're capable of much more than just riots.
The rally was attended by a mixture of right-wing parliamentary parties, public figures and ordinary people who carried Serbian and Russian flags and banners with slogans supporting Russian military effort in Ukraine and different conspiracy theories.
If this government made us come here, then I guess it is time to change it. I'm supportive of Russia. It is my family tradition. My whole family has ties to Russia. They were priests in Gračanica in Kosovo, and we were all expelled.
I'm always for the better, and what we have now leads nowhere. There is no justice, literally no justice. Vučić did not buy Kosovo, nor did he get it, nor it is his, nor did his father leave it to him so that he can sign whatever he needs to sign.
Right after the rally, President Vučić stated that he would not allow extremists with foreign support either from the east or the west to threaten order in Serbia. He met the leaders of the intelligence community and a few leaders of the far-right groups were arrested.
Bulgaria also has tight relations with Russia due to the common history after and before the liberation. That's why the country was more dependent of Russia than others. A huge part of the society has a deep respect of Russia, although this changed a bit after the war in Ukraine started. Even the political crisis in Bulgaria became a hostage of the pro- and anti-Russia sentiments. The biggest dependence, though, is of energy resources that we used to get mainly from Russia. Now, Bulgaria is trying to separate from these dependencies, but this is not easy and for sure not a quick process.
The division along the Russia axis was evident in Bulgaria from the first day of the war. Some wanted to impose sanctions, and others vehemently opposed such action.
Да покажем на нашите партньори от Европейския съюз и НАТО, че от тук нататък България ще говори в един глас в тези две семейства.
Каква точно е ползата на България от налагането на санкции, в резултат на което ще загубим ние?
The division in society did not decrease despite the government's actions. Politicians were also divided on sending military aid to Ukraine.
Даване на още оръжие означава удължаване на войната. Ние сме за мир.
In a bid to wrest itself from Russia's influence, Bulgaria expelled 70 Russian diplomats, putting it at odds with Moscow.
Ставить перед руководством моей страны вопрос практически закрытия посольства, поскольку мы не можем функционировать.
Bulgaria has been dependent on Russian energy resources for years. In an attempt to diversify supplies, Sofia built gas interconnector with Greece.
This pipeline is a game changer. It's a game changer for Bulgaria and for Europe's energy security.
But the Bulgarian president's statements leave open the question, has Bulgaria really broken away from Moscow's influence?
Служебното правителство изпълни задачата, поставена от 48-то Народно събрание, да се предостави въоръжение от резервите на българската армия. Надявам се, че правителството ще прояви разум за в бъдеще това да не се допуска.
And with elections coming up, maintaining a strict Euro-Atlantic stance is becoming more and more difficult. For Euronews, Georgi Karamfilov.
I'm curious, how is it in Albania, not that close to the conflict, historically not that involved? How do ordinary people feel about the war, about Ukraine, about Russia? Franko, this is a question for you again.
Actually, in terms of the reaction of the Albanians towards this conflict, not only the political parties, and I mean all of them, but even the public opinion, and I mean all of it, are very much against the aggression of Russia. They consider it a serious violation of the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Actually, in terms of economic impact, the ordinary Albanians are feeling the pinch. All our colleagues from around Europe mentioned the increase in prices of everyday products. The same thing has happened in Albania. We have felt it in the daily bread. We have felt it in sugar, in salt. But most importantly, we have felt it in the oil prices, and the transport is becoming even more expensive, and the products that are transported inside the country and from outside inside have increased dramatically. But actually, although these things are happening as we speak in Albania, not a single person is supporting what Russia is doing. On the contrary, the reaction has been extremely vehement. The Albanians do not accept the aggression of Russia against the Ukraine. On the other hand, in terms of geopolitics, the Albanians are following with great attention what the international emissaries, like those of the United States of America and those of the European Union, the dialogue that is taking place between the Republic of Kosovo and the Republic of Serbia. And they are looking forward to an agreement which probably will be signed at some time in not far future, that the relations between these two countries will be stabilized. Actually, as you know, Albania is a NATO member country, and last year it started its negotiations to become a full member of the European Union.
Thank you, Franko. And some of our countries have similar stories to the one with Ukraine. I'm talking about Abkhazia and South Ossetia. How did Georgia handle this situation? Nuka, remind us, please.
Yes, Marie. When we speak about similarities, I think many in the world have remembered what happened in Georgia in 2008 when Russia started its invasion in Ukraine. Back in 2008, the scenario of Kremlin and Vladimir Putin was almost the same. The official pretext of invasion in Georgia was that Russian troops were protecting population in Georgia from Georgia itself. And even back then, like now in Ukraine, Russia was not calling it a war. This was not a war for Russia. It was a peacekeeping operation for them. However, the hostilities between Russia and Georgia did not start back in 2008. It counts several centuries, but if we focus on more modern history, we would see that Georgia, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Georgia went through several bloody conflicts, after which Georgia, Tbilisi, lost control on Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and Russia is still occupying about 20% of Georgia's territories. So this is natural for the country which has about 500,000 of its population internally displaced for the Russian aggression. It's natural that all the past trauma, all the past wounds came back after the war, and the people in Georgia still remind and remember that it was warning the whole world that Russia was not going to stop in Georgia and that it would go much farther.
Thank you, Nuka. And I'm going back to Sasha in Lyon. As I reminded you, she was one of the first journalists to be in the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Sasha, how this war changed the world, and what is the way from now on? Can anybody predict?
I think it changed beyond the point of no return. When Western think tanks and best military experts were giving Kyiv a few days before it would fall under Russian pressure and invasion, they calculated the number of tanks Ukraine had, the number of planes, the ammunition, the missile stocks. That is what their predictions were based on. They could not calculate the unity and determination of Ukrainian people to fight Russian aggression. And this is why Ukraine stands and fights a year after. The difference here being Ukrainians always knew that they would not surrender and would always fight for their independence and sovereignty. The world did not know it. It would take the world weeks and months to understand that the phrase that was said at the Snake Island by Ukrainian soldiers to the Russian flagship Moskva ship is the very definition of Ukrainian strategy. But after Russian forces were pushed out of Kyiv region, then from Kharkiv, and then from Kherson, the only regional capital Russians managed to occupy, the West also understood this. Russian invasion certainly united Ukraine. I have just returned from Kyiv myself, and it is amazing how Ukrainian society operates these days as one single unit with one goal, the victory. But it has also united the West. The unprecedented unity and support by the European Union, by the United States, by the West has changed the current geopolitical landscape and the balance of power, while at the same time bringing unbelievable clarity about the positions and stance the countries take. And that's what Putin got wrong. He did not expect the democratic world to unite.
Yes, thank you, Sasha. And back to Kyiv and Anastasia Dimitrova. Nastya, what are the hopes of the people now? What do they expect?
Well, every Ukrainian has only one hope, has only one dream, for the war to be over soon with a victory for Ukraine. Everybody here, as Sasha said, has united their efforts for this to happen. Everybody does what they can to help the military, to help the people in need, to help the government in order the victory to come. The people that I spoke with today and the days that we are here are saying this: we will win. Let's hear.
We live not so bad here in Kyiv, but very hard for our souls. We experience everything very hard. We fear for our children's lives. It is very offensive. It is very unfortunate what is happening now in Ukraine.
I can't even make a comparison. Everything has changed morally, financially, everything.
Everything has changed. You understand yourself that you don't get used to these constant worries, but all of us have to remain optimistic that our victory will be there.
It was very interesting talking to you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to my colleagues from Euronews Romania, Albania, Georgia, Serbia, Bulgaria, Ukraine, and the headquarters of Euronews in Lyon. We'll be back soon with more. Thank you for your time and stay with Euronews.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Террор вам никто никогда не простит, никто в мире вам этого не простит. Украина никогда не простит.
Мама, что? Все. Заходите.